neutrality, or specifically, we're looking at American neutrality here. And I'm just giving you a heads up, I'm going to be jumping back and forth between American view of World War II while they're being neutral and what's actually going on in the war before America officially joins in. Germany is going to invade Poland in September 1st of 1939. At this point, Poland's allies, Britain and France, are going to declare war on Germany in turn. However, they really couldn't stop the German war machine. The conquest of Poland is going to be described as using Blitzkrieg. This is the Germans' warfare strategy. Blitzkrieg translates to lightning war. And just like lightning, basically the Germans would punch holes in defensive positions and race forward like 30 or 40 miles every day. On top of that, they would coordinate their attacks using dive bombers, tanks, trucks, motorcycles. And with all of this, basically, the Germans could attack whenever and wherever Hitler chose them to. And so when we're looking at 1939 all the way to October of 1941, basically Germany goes from victory to victory to victory. They're going to strike at central positions and they're going to time out each new front. To the east, they invade Poland in 1939. In the north, they're going to invade Denmark and Norway in April and May of 1940. To the west, you have the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. And these are going to all be invaded in May and June of 1940, although I should also admit Italy joins in on those particular invasions as well. To the south, they're going to invade the Balkans, but they're going to enlist the help of Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria as their allies. And basically, they're going to conquer Yugoslavia and Greece by like April and May of 1941. We're also going to see the Battle of Britain, the second half of 1940. Basically, Germany is going to bombard Britain mercilessly and try to pound them into submission. What really protects Great Britain during this time is that Great Britain is an island. And so it takes a lot more to coordinate attacking Great Britain. However, the Germans are going to game once too often when they tried to invade the Soviet Union in June of 1941. The initial attack is going to catch the so-called Red Army off guard, the Soviet Union off guard, because the thing is the Soviet Union had actually signed a non-aggression pact with Germany in 1939. Now the thing is, Soviet Union dictator Joseph Stalin had actually been warned by the British that the Germans were building up armaments and everything, and that we're going to attack him. But he thought this was just the British trying to goad him into going to war with Germany and join the British side and everything. The thing is, when Hitler attacks the USSR or the Soviet Union, what he really wants is to take its resources, because these resources could potentially make him invincible. So it's those raw materials. So Germany is going to push forward and try to take on entire Soviet armies until they are going to be met with a bitter winter. And basically this is what stops German columns on the outskirts of Moscow, and they hope to finish up in the spring. So all of this has been going on, but what about America? Most Americans wanted to stay out of it. Oftentimes they were called isolationists because they didn't want to involve themselves in world affairs, but a lot of these isolationists, to be fair, saw themselves as realists. And these groups of people are really going to limit FDR's ability to try to help out the Allied powers. And it's going to be things like the Neutrality Acts and legislation prohibiting loans to nations that hadn't paid off their debts from World War I. And those nations specifically were France and Great Britain. Plus, you have to keep in mind, all the ethnic diversity of America makes it a lot harder for Americans to take sides. After all, Irish Americans generally still resented English rule, and German Americans remember all of the anti-German sentiment and propaganda from World War I, and like Italian Americans all admired Mussolini. So there's an element of that it's a lot harder to just say outright that they took one side or another. Still, as much as non-intervention had a direct emotional appeal, we are seeing some people swayed towards the Allied cause. But the problem with that is that to help countries like China or Britain rested on like abstract kinds of values. It'd be like valuing free societies and free markets, which are important, whereas non-intervention is valuing American soldiers' lives. So you can see the issue here. Now, that being said, we do get like broadcasts of London under German bombing, and this kind of heightens that sense of imperialized freedom and should we do something with one of our longest allies in American history. And you do have to keep in mind things like freedom of trade are important to the economic life of Americans because of the Great Depression and everything. And we do see like business leaders were really concerned about an overwhelming Axis victory bringing economic instability. But even with some people being concerned about this, 85% of Americans agreed that America should only fight if America was directly attacked. So FDR trying to get involved and help the Allies on some level basically means he has to chip away at America's neutrality. We are going to see things like on October 1st of 1939, lawmakers will reluctantly allow the sales of armaments to belligerent nations on a cash and carry basis. This is once again avoiding more debts from the European nations, and it allows us economically to improve as well. But you got to keep in mind things like isolationism and anti-Semitism show exactly why the United States only has maybe a couple thousand Jewish refugees during World War II. Most Americans were really unsympathetic to Jewish refugees. In fact, there's stories about America turning away ships that had German refugees, German Jewish refugees, I should say, and forcing them to go back to Europe. Now, there is some small gestures, but most of the time they're like individuals that FDR would allow these like German and Austrian refugees, including like scientists and artists, to remain in the United States on visitor permits. Most of the public also supported these kinds of restrictions on immigration. So remember all of the nativism we've had up to this point. But we are seeing the United States starting to edge closer to involvement by the time we're getting to like 1940. It's going to be things like, this is like preparedness. And so we're going to see the establishment of the National Defense Advisory Commission. We're going to see the establishment of the Council of National Defense. So these are dealing with like strategic planning for if America goes to war. The other issue is we're going to see France is defeated at this time. And this makes the war a lot more serious. It's a lot harder for a lot of Americans to stay on the sidelines when France has been defeated, because you could say France is the longest and first ally of the United States. I mean, think back to the Revolutionary War when they had been America's ally, and now France has been defeated by Germany. At that point, we're going to see the United States expands their army to about 2 million men. They're going to build warplanes. They're going to add ships to the Navy. And you're going to see the approval for the nation's first peacetime draft, which would require 16.5 million men to register for military service. Just giving you a heads up, today we still have a peacetime draft in that all men over 18 in the United States must register for the draft. They're not necessarily going to be forced to war unless we declare war and everything like that, and we haven't had we haven't used the draft since like the Vietnam War, but we do technically have a draft because people have to register for it. We're also going to see during this time like a destroyer deal with Great Britain. Basically, Great Britain needed warships that were small and maneuverable so they could guard imports of like food and war materials from like German submarines. So we're seeing America starting to intervene a little bit. Which brings us to the election of 1940. Keep in mind, at this point, FDR has already served 8 years as the American president. Also, keep in mind that foreign policy really was secondary when we get to this election. The Republicans are going to put forward Wendell Willkie, and FDR is going to try for an unprecedented third term. Now, this did concern some people. They felt like it might have been arrogant on his part to go for a third term, which, by the way, now presidents can only go for 2 terms. We just didn't have term limits at that point in time when it came to the presidency. So some felt like this was arrogant, but others pointed out that there's a legitimate concern across the nation for like continuity in this time of peril of dealing with the Great Depression and potentially World War II. Now, it is a tighter race, but FDR, as you can see here, still got 55% of the vote. He is going to pledge no Americans will fight in a foreign war. But he also points out in private, technically, if America was to be attacked, the war would no longer be a foreign war.